Something was inside of me for a long time, but I wasn't thinking about this during pandemic. Like this whole thing that I was growing up with, it was like actually exploding because I knew it's not true, but like I had to do something with it. And so that was the start of a long process.
Exploding is a really strong word. Was that explosion just something that you kind of felt internally? Was there a social dimension to that explosion? Hello and welcome to the podcast. If you're doubting or deconstructing your faith, you're in the right place. On this podcast, we make space to be totally honest about doubt while also being hopeful about faith in Christ. Today I'm interviewing Salomon. He's a friend of mine who does youth ministry in Poland, but his interests also include videography and interesting conversations about doubt. I think you can see why we connected. In this episode, we discuss the journey of doubt he's been on since the pandemic. It was a fascinating conversation, so enjoy.
My journey with Jesus started 10 years ago. I can say it, 10 years ago. Or even a little bit more. Like, I was born into Christian home. Like, my parents are Christians, Protestants. So actually, I am, I could say I am Christian from the birth, but well, I actually had the moment to develop my own relationship with God. But like, I need to find my own way. And then I would say like 10 years ago, I decided that I want to follow Jesus.
What initially drew you to following Jesus then? What sparked that change when you had already become so familiar with Christianity?
Like, I was looking at young people who were actually serving God, and they had this kind of joy, and they like to do it. They like to be like with each other. They like to be with others, and there was like so much joy in them, and I was like envy of that kind of like I also want that. And like, if life with God looks like this, I also want I also want to live with God, and because up to that time I only see, like the old church people being sad, and well, they were not encouraging to actually be a believer, be a follower of Jesus. But then I saw young people in my age or a little bit older, that they actually are enjoying it, and they are serving God with joy.
At some point in your story, you also faced some challenges and doubt. So I'm wondering where that pivot came after having joined this joyful community. What was it that sparked serious questioning of whether you were going to continue in it?
I would say it was a process, but for sure there were some things that were destabilizing, like that roadblocks that actually just I had to do something with them, because if not, then will I be a believer or no? Like stuff like this. So of course, like it came after this moment. Like, so it was, I would say right now it was maybe like 3 years ago that actually my faith had to evolve. So actually, what sparked the transformation was the COVID-19. Because of course, like, a long time, questioning all the things, but more about my parents, who are also Christians, but like they were very into some conspiracy theories, and so I was getting a lot of movies about, like, this is the, like, like the science is wrong, and like the scientists are evil, and stuff like this. And then I was thinking about this. Okay, I don't believe that that's true, that the science is that bad, But I grew up in this home that, maybe that guy, Dr. Ken Howland. Howland, yeah. So I wouldn't
Yeah,
call him a
Hovind,
doctor,
yeah.
but sorry, I don't want to be controversial.
Sure, I can edit that out if you want.
Yeah, no problem. But like, well, so I was like indoctrinated into thinking that, like, you have to choose Bible slash faith or the science. There is this dichotomy. Like you can have both. You only can have one, and like if you go with faith, then you are truthful, you believe God, and that's good choice. And if you take side of science, then it will be, well, then you are trusting the sinful nature, the mind, and stuff like this. And so in that moment, like during pandemic, like this whole thing that I was growing up with, it was like actually exploding because I knew it's not true, but like I had to do something with it. And so that was the start of a long process.
Exploding is a really strong word. Was that explosion just something that you kind of felt internally, like really feeling that destabilizing tension, or was that also being expressed in your church or your home? Was there a social dimension to that explosion?
Yeah, it was, I would say, hmm, very specific situation. I didn't have community by itself. And my community was kind of like maybe relationship with mom and stuff like this with parents. And then they were like sending me stuff that were actually hard for me, but also I didn't agree with those things. And the explosion word, yeah, it's a strong word. I would say it was that something was inside of me for a long time, but I wasn't thinking about this. I don't know the word in English for it. There was something, let's say it was something in the shoe, like some rock, but like I was just ignoring it. But like then it started hurting. Like it was bad for me. Like it hurt me. So then I had to do something with it.
What's the word that you wanted to use in Polish?
It's called tarcie. It's just like something is um I don't know. Maybe you can help me with my
Yeah,
gestures.
yeah. Maybe I'll add an editing note. I'll jump in and I'll try to Google Translate it. Like
Oh,
maybe like abrasive or something like that. Like it's like rubbing until it
mhm.
hurts. I understand what you're trying to say. That
Oh,
this was
friction. Friction.
friction. Did you
I
just
just
Google
had
it?
to Google it for, yeah, the friction. Yeah, I felt a friction inside of me, and I was in the moment that, okay, this friction will either make me lose my faith totally, or I will like hmm, change some things in my faith that actually I can live with God.
Like in a way, you had to renegotiate what faith was going to look like and
Yeah,
reconfigure things because the science that you believed and the faith beliefs you had weren't working. You called that a process. So I'm just curious, like, what did that process look like? Did it take years?
yeah, yeah. Like because I would say like growing up, I wasn't questioning things that much. I only saw that this is kind of one-sided, but like all of my doubts were like hidden somewhere. I just were like putting them on a shelf. Well, and then like I guess say like this the shelf like just collapsed, and like, well, okay, we have to do something with it, and because if not, then I will just stop believing. And so from that moment, I would say it was a process of actually, hmm, like if I will have to stick with the image of the shelf that collapsed, like just so when you have a shelf and it's collapsing because there's too many books, then like the process look like, okay, I was sitting on the ground, taking like every book to hand and actually thinking that, okay, do I need this book on my shelf? Kind of like this image I think may be helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that is a helpful image. I really like it. Like the shelf is full of doubts and beliefs, and then it collapses. And then now, because it collapsed, you're kind of forced to, well, I guess you could walk away, but you're saying you're not walking away. Then you're going to try to rebuild the shelves. And while doing that, you're taking a sincere look at each book and seeing whether you want to kind of put that back into a worldview that works. So what were, like, to go with this illustration, what were some of the books that made it back onto the shelf? What were some of the books that didn't? And why did you make those choices?
Oh man, I am not prepared for that that many details, but like I mean, for sure, like I had to redefine what it means to actually have faith, or like what means to trust Jesus, you know. And so the first thing was this science versus the Bible. Like I had to take this book and maybe just change it, or like you know rip some pages from it. Like it was also like a few months process, I would say. But okay, actually, those things can work together. I don't have to live this false dichotomy that they are like only one of them is right. So that was the first thing in the process of putting things back on shelf, and that was actually a big relief for me. Then later it was the topic of apocalypse, the second coming and stuff like this, which was also very heavy for me because I also grew up with this, vibe that like every day is your last day, and like Jesus can just, like uh, jump out of the corner and say, "Psych, you are going, to heaven or no? You don't know." Because he's like a thief in the night, And so it was also like when I think about this and like teaching children that thing that actually is well, I know it's a theological concept, but actually when kids are developing, that's such a bad thing to like give it to them, like because they are scary. And like I remember when I was a kid, I was home alone, and I was sitting at the window, like in home, but like looking through the window and looking if my parents are coming back. And I wasn't sure if they are coming back because we believe that like God can take the people, the believers, to heaven, right? And then I will be alone because I wasn't a good believer or something, or I did something bad. That's a pretty solid image I have in my mind, like of these moments, like looking through the window and like waiting for my parents to came back and I wasn't sure if they will.
I can certainly resonate with that fear. And I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's like, well, if you believe it theologically, then you want to teach it to your kids. But I also understand that it really, I grew up with that same, I guess, what's been called rapture anxiety. I actually resonate with that. I definitely felt those fears as well. But you were able to move forward in that. What did that look like?
So I started with actually reading about those theories, about second coming, like premillennialism, amillennialism, the postmillennialism, like oh man, that's hard.
Dispensationalism.
Yes, I
Yeah,
would
it's not fair
never.
for you. These are all complicated words in a different language for you.
Yeah, but it's fine. I can read them. It's harder to speak them out. Yeah, and so I was reading about this, and actually, then I realized, okay, so this belief that I grew up in, so it was basically this dispensa something, and and so actually, that's pretty fresh, like pretty new belief, and actually, people were believing other things during the history of church, and so it started with that, with just reading and researching about this topic, and actually not living in fear, because this fear of the end of times being very very near is something that I was protesting like inside for a long time, because my mother was constantly bombarding me with like some news that this millionaire is antichrist, and this thing is his tool. And like I was like, but how can she believe like Jesus, who is provider, who is her shepherd, and also live in this fear, of those things being so scary? Like I just it's not working for me. And so actually, yeah, when I get rid of it, I was like, okay, mom. Well, if that's what you believe, that's okay. I just don't believe it, you know. If you are caring for me and like by saying those things you think that you are actually helping me, okay, that's well, that's good, but I won't watch them, you know, because I watch some of them. I don't think they have good basis on Bible and other stuff, and I will not do it anymore.
What I hear you saying is really a description of something that a lot of people go through, which is that they grow up in a context where certain things get tied to Christianity and they seem really like the absolute core. Like you're like this view of end times, it's not a position, it is Christianity.
Yeah,
And if you
yeah,
don't believe this, then that's not Christianity anymore. And so you find yourself really confused trying to separate what it means to really follow Jesus at its core and what is like a specific denominational belief or a Christian subculture. And in the case of and this, dispensational end times theology, you're right. It's a very new theology. It's hundreds of years old, not thousands of years old. So it's kind of a newer understanding of the apocalypse and what that's going to look like. So it sounds like, in a way, you kind of worked through that. So we've talked about science and faith and kind of end times theology. Is there another kind of book that you had to pick up and consider whether it was going to go back on the shelf?
well, the third thing is it's hard for me because it's not so strict, you know, like but
Mm-hmm.
mostly like the woman in ministry, or like, you know, like
Oh, okay.
this inequality that we have like in church, and that some people can do this, or some they could not. And so yeah, that was the thing I had to also think about and like pray about and read about. Yeah, like because this process of this shelf collapsing actually made me okay look at all of the beliefs I had during growing up, and they actually weren't mine, you know, they were like inherited. So I took each one of them and okay, how is it looking? Does it actually have like a biblical basis? What others are thinking about this? What history tells about this and stuff like this. So yeah, like a lot of things. Maybe one of the things that are still going on is like the meaning of actually life with Christ. What does it mean, like, you know? So that's the thing that is like still going on, and like yeah, it's a big book, you know.
Right. You're just saying, like, maybe if you're going to add a fourth book there, it's just even what it looks like to live a full life following Jesus.
Yeah,
I mean, that makes sense too, because different churches and different traditions really define that differently.
yeah,
Some would be about, the list of beliefs that you adhere to, some about what you do, some about how you feel on the inside or your religious experiences. And of course, I think the truth is kind of a combo of all of that somehow. But I really appreciate that because, of course, Truth Snack is not really designed to convince anyone of like a particular denomination. But I love what you said about, you had to look at your beliefs and realize that they were inherited. But then you had to look at them and do the hard work of figuring out what it was that you believed and assessing your relationship with Christ yourself. And I think that's the real value of what you've kind of given us with that shelf illustration, is just kind of
mm,
going at some point to be a mature follower. I think we all need to make that decision and not just rely on our family inheritance. It's kind of like, and I'm not trying to call you a Pharisee or anyone, but it's kind of like the Pharisees in the Bible who thought because of their heritage that they were good, but they were
yeah,
rejecting the Christ, And he's like,
yeah,
no, like you need to see me. It's not just about your inheritance or your rules. He wanted them to engage with him on a personal level. And so I think you're kind of building a different illustration for us to consider, that to not just rely on our heritage.
yeah. And like with the we can call it the fourth book or something, but I would say then like it's also like kind of making a distance from all of this knowledge, and like it's like okay, actually those things aren't so important. Because like, well, if those things, like let's say the science versus Bible, would make me unbeliever, then of course, like, it's good that I did the stuff I did, but like, just the belief that actually I have to have right knowledge on things is also the thing I had to, like, throughout, because, well, it's good to know things, like, it's good to actually learn about things, but it's like, life with God is not about like knowing all the right doctrines. Yeah, it's way more than that. So that's the thing that is currently on in my life, and that's something that is also like kind of redefining, like, this whole thing.
It's interesting that your story is about giving yourself more knowledge and learning theology and learning about philosophy. But it's interesting that your end conclusion is that it's actually not all about those things. It's actually about a relationship with Jesus at the end of the day. So that's actually a fascinating point. But I was kind of curious, like as you were journeying kind of through these big questions and doubts, what was some of the most helpful advice you received from others, and maybe what was some of the least helpful advice that you got along the way?
Mm, well, so I can for sure start with the
Sure.
least helpful. Like, it's, you have to trust God more, you have to pray more, those things. And they are actually hard to listen to, because you feel like people who are speaking this, they actually don't care about you, because they then don't actually take time to listen to you, but they are actually just giving you advice. And those advices don't work, because if you say that I need to pray more, then you are saying that, okay, hey, so you are, I don't know, like, you have this problem because you are not spiritual enough, you are not praying enough. And that's a big thing to say to someone, that's, you don't, you shouldn't say that.
Right. Because it implies that the problem that you see is not the real problem. The problem is you.
Yeah,
Right. So,
yeah.
yeah, for sure that can feel hurtful or dismissive. So, yeah, that might not be very helpful. But what was some helpful advice that you received?
Yeah, so I would say knowing things is okay. Like, it's actually, it was important for me, but like, life with Jesus is way more than that. It's way more than those, like, biblical answers and stuff. Like, it's just, like, those questions and answers, they are just some part of life with God, and so if I don't want to lose that, like, this relationship that I have with Christ, actually, I have to know that there will always be some questions, and like, and it's okay to think about them and to look for answers, but actually, it's not all about them, like, so I think this advice is actually okay, like, keep close to Jesus, and just be with him, because if you will not do it, it will be actually hard to believe God and believe Bible on the Christ, because like, you are reading about questions and answers and like a lot of hard stuff, and if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, then actually you are very close to, like, actually rejecting your faith, because the amount of questions you have, it's just too big for you, and actually you have no hope there.
And that's a big paradigm shift to think I'm going to try to go through these questions with Jesus, and
Yeah.
trust that he has grace enough that as I'm going to get a whole bunch of stuff wrong and be confused with these big questions, that he can still be there with me. Instead of being like, I'm going to keep Jesus at a distance until I have all my questions answered. So that's a huge distinction and really good advice,
Yeah, and
actually.
I think that it kept me sane, because, like, just the knowing that Jesus is bigger than those questions, and that actually, because if not this advice and like this kind of like a way of thinking, then I don't know where I will be today, because the amount of questions like I had, or like even have now, it's a big just bag of questions. Like, okay, like, there's more, like, this is more than those questions, and like I want to trust him, and he will somehow make this process go smoothly.
It's also that Jesus might have other things he wants to work on with you than those questions, or he might order those questions in a different order than you. You're like, this is most important. And Jesus is like, actually, I think that's more important. And
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
work on that, you know? So there is a huge level of trust to go, I'm actually gonna kind of swim in this messy sea, but kind of let Jesus be part of it.
Mhm.
That is an incredibly hopeful and incredibly faithful attitude to have. I think even having that would be a huge comfort for doubters as a mentality.
Yeah.
You know, in working through your questions, you've mostly talked about kind of reading you've done and that kind of stuff. But were there kind of people or programs or communities where you felt safe enough to express these doubts to people, especially because you've talked about how at first what really drew you was this kind of
Mm.
joyful community? Like, what did community look like on that journey?
Well, I would want to give a good example, but I don't think I have. Actually, it's pretty hard for doubters, like, to find some kind of community, because usually in churches and like some Christian groups, it's like if you doubt, then oh, that's bad, that you are not trusting Christ enough. And so I don't have a lot to say about this. Well, I didn't find a community like this in Poland until recently, because I'm doing a bachelor, and right now I found there that the teachers there actually like have some also knowledge, but also struggled with some things and questions. So actually, that was a good thing for me to discover. And like I would say, outside of that, like some English speaking groups of people, usually those groups are like, well, way more into doubting than I would want to, like they are way more radical than I fail to. But like I'm okay with being there. Of course, like I won't accept everything that they are speaking there, but I have my own mind, and I actually can have and like be encouraged that there are so many people with so many questions and so many struggles, and actually it helps me. But like I know some people would say, don't be there because you will lose your faith or something. Like, I mean, I have my own brain. I can just see this and actually be encouraged because of this.
What you're describing, or the place that you would like to find, is what Truth Snack tries to do, and which is why I love it, which is you want a place where you can be honest about doubt, but also a place where you can be hopeful about faith,
Mhm.
where you can kind of do those things together. So I'm sorry that you feel you haven't found that a lot. I definitely understand how desperate it can feel for that when you're on a doubt crisis. It's so hard to not have a place where you can be honest about doubt but hopeful about faith. Just kind of one last question then. Like, in your opinion, what could churches do in order to do that better? Like, what would some practical tips look like? And it's not really tips, because that makes it sound like it's just run a program. It's really a change of heart. But what would
Like,
that look like
yeah,
for
like
churches to
10
support
tips
better?
to help your church.
Right,
Oh,
because if you just want to like do these tips, or like, oh, we have a suggestion jar and like now we're done. We know it's way deeper than
yeah.
that. It's a spiritual, heart thing to welcome doubters. But
Yeah, I would say, like, if I can say something to churches listening to this, or like pastors, it's sad that it's not common knowledge, but actually listening is the key, you know?
hmm,
Listening is the key, and if someone have a question, don't try to answer it them, like, right off the bat. Because usually it's not about only this question, and the knowledge is not also like all of there is, like the if someone is struggling with that, like with some hard questions, it's way more important to be with them in that process, to actually talk with them, just to encourage them. I don't know, pray for them, pray with them, just be there, be with them to talk. Like, of course, like you can suggest some answers, but like don't be too pushy, and don't think your theology is like the right one, because that's something that actually is making people that actually and not seek for help in churches.
That's actually a really good point too, that you said that like the question isn't the whole thing. Like that question is connected to probably like 10 other questions,
Yeah.
and it's connected to maybe fears or family or anxiety, or there's a whole thing going on beneath the surface. So offering, a really concise theological argument, it could be helpful, but it probably won't be as helpful as kind of what you're saying, journeying with people and taking time to let them process what's really going on. Because at least in my own experience, I think it's true that you ask these questions, but you're not even really sure why you're asking, and you're not even sure what answer you're looking for. Like it takes time to even figure that out.
And also like to not, I don't know, also the word in English, but like to stigmatize, because that's also hard, because like when someone is doubting something or like asking some questions, like the worst thing you can do is like, those doubters, then they don't believe Christ in the Bible, and like that's the way to actually make people not want to come to church, like just to accept like those people will be there, and it's okay to have doubt, and express that actually Jesus is more than those questions.
And interestingly enough, if you tell a doubter that doubting means you're not a Christian, you're telling them not to be a Christian anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're doubting.
Yeah.
But what they want to be is a Christian. They want to know, or they want to know what's true. They really want to figure it out and have faith, and not just kind of live out the beliefs they've inherited. Well, Solomon, thank you so much for sharing so openly and honestly. Thank you for that shelf illustration. I think I'm probably going to steal that going forward, because it's actually a helpful way of thinking about it.
That's fine. Like it was right off the bat inspiration, but I think that the image is correct with the topic of doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks for asking me. Like it's always encouraging to share this experience of being in the doubt, because then when you think about this, you feel like actually it's not wasted.
Mm-hmm.
Actually you can help someone with your experience that was hard for you, but actually can help someone, so yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you pass it on to someone else you think would enjoy it? And as always, if you have something to add, don't hesitate to reach out at matt@truthsnack.ca. Until next time.